Well, I know most of you, but if you don't, my name's Jay Willinga. I'm serving as the Senior Advancement Officer at Northwestern part-time. And we were given the opportunity to get acquainted with Dr. James Kennedy and his wife, Simona. And over the years, as they've hosted, we've had the privilege of working with them, hosting a number of Northwestern alumni and friends bike tours in the Netherlands. And there's a number of alumni I see here tonight. And James is the lead bike, and he shares his historical expertise, and Simona does all the work. And so James is back to receive an award, a well-deserved award from the Northwestern College National Alumni Association for professional development, a well-deserved honor. And if I had the ability, I would also award one to Simona for such an award. You are a delightful couple. You serve Northwestern, certainly, but academia and humankind so well. And it's a privilege for us to have you here this evening to hear from James. Dr. James Kennedy, he's a professor of modern Dutch history and a distinguished university professor of community engagement, learning at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. He previously served as Dean of the University of College Utrecht, which offers an English language undergraduate program at Utrecht University. The author of many books and articles on Dutch history, James was chairman of the committee that presented a revised version of the Canon of the Netherlands, a historical canon that includes 50 important persons, objects, and events that played pivotal roles in the country's historical and cultural development. James holds a bachelor's degree from Georgetown University after a very formative year at Northwestern College.
2 years.
A master's degree from Calvin College and Seminary, and a doctorate from the University of Iowa. I know that Mom and Dad are on their way. They're somewhere between Hayward and here. They would love to be here at the beginning, but they'll be here after a bit, so it'll be great to see Bill and Nella as well will be here. They'll walk in, and we'll have to give them a big welcome as well. But for now, please welcome to Orange City, Dr. James Kennedy.
Thank you, Jay. Is this working? Okay. For the nice introduction. Yeah, it was 2 years, 2 formative years, and so it was really, so in that sense, yeah, Northwestern really did shape me in all kinds of ways, and all good. So it's great to be back here. You know, I was born here in September of 1963, and so this really is like coming home, and it's great to see the town. It's great to see how it's the same, and it's also great to see how it's really looking a lot different. I mean, it's especially, you know, the business areas and the Dutch fronts and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of that was not here when I was growing up, so it's really nice to see. It's good to see that Dutch connection. Now, so I'm going to be talking not about here, but I'm going to be talking about there, and I see there's a typo here right away, and I think it's the only one. So, but we'll see what we can do. So, now I'm just going to say a number of things. First of all, just to give you kind of an indication of where the Dutch are. This is just by way of a kind of a general introduction. You may know it's about 5.2% of the U.S. population, 18 million people. It's about a quarter of the size of Iowa. So that's just to give it kind of a superimposing there what the size of it is. It's the 18th largest economy in the world. So it's a small country, but it's really quite big, and it's the 5th of the European Union. You can see its per capita income is $85,000 a year compared to the US, which is $89,000. But when you compare it to the European average, it's really much higher. European average is at $65,000 a year. Its growth rate is a little lower than the US in 2025, as it's projected now, 1.4% compared to 1.8% for the US. You can see its poverty rate. It's put that down. It's about half of what it is of what the US is, at 8.5%. It's a place that, at least according to the Social Mobility Index, people can go from rags to riches relatively easy, right? So it's number 6 on that list, right? So the chances of moving up. The US is at number 27, And the net migration rate, that is to say number of people coming in as opposed to leaving, is at 4%, slightly higher than the US for the year 2023. Life expectancy, you can sort of see it's at 82 or just a little bit more compared to 79.3 in the US, roughly similar, just a little bit higher. But at the same time, the percentage of GDP for healthcare is at 10.1% compared to 16.5 for the US. So it's, they spend a lot less money on healthcare. Fertility rate is significantly lower than the US, 1.44. The US is 1.62. Both of those numbers are far lower than the replacement numbers that are needed at 2.1, but still a lot higher than South Korea, which is at 0.75, right? So, but the average age is also older than the US. It's about 42 as opposed to 38 or 39. I thought also, given the traction of the issue here, you can also say the abortions per 1,000 women is at 7 compared to 14.4 for the United States. So it's about half that number. The World Happiness Report, of course, this is the measure of all things. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are all kinds of reasons to have criticism of the World Happiness Report, but the Netherlands is at number 5. The Scandinavian countries always beat it out, or Finland in particular, and the US is now at number 24. So, okay, the Corruption Perception Index, so how corrupt is the country? We don't know how great corruption is because we don't know what we don't know, but how people perceive of it, right? So it's number 9 compared to 28 in the United States. The homicide rate at 0.7 is quite a bit lower than the US at 5.8. Crime index, and that is 100 is really high crime. US is at 52, the Netherlands at 35. And Freedom House rates in the year 2024, last year, when it comes to political rights and civil liberties, the Netherlands gets 97 out of 100 points compared to 84 in the United States. Okay. So, it is just by way of sort of introducing the country. Why would anybody be unhappy in the Netherlands? Okay, so, this is a picture actually of riots that took place 2 weeks ago. So in The Hague, and so people were shocked by protests that led to extensive violence in the Hague, where the government is seated. And so people were wondering what's going on with this country. So we had maybe about 1,000 or 1,500 people who rioted against the police there. That came out of a protest against the further, it was essentially a protest that tried to urge the government to restrict immigration further. That was the basis for the protest. And so we'll be talking about that too in just a minute. Okay? Because migration is the leading issue when you take a look at the Dutch elections now. This is what people talk about, this is what people are concerned about, and you can sort of see how the Netherlands fits into this pattern. You can see the number of foreign-born people in the United States has risen, declined, risen over the course of time. So it was very high at the end of the 19th century, and then it dipped down to, well, by the time I was a kid, it was at record lows, and then it's up to about 15.6% today. And we know migration is an important issue here, but what about Europe? The Netherlands here is at about 13.4% of its population is foreign-born. So it's roughly similar to the US, slightly lower, but it's roughly similar. But you can see it's not as high as Germany's or the Scandinavian states. So it's really, in that sense, not at the top end. It's not like Switzerland. You can see here 30%. But again, we need to ask the question, who's foreign-born and what counts as foreign-born? But it's still quite a bit higher than what you see in Eastern Europe. Numbers of people who are foreign-born in Eastern Europe is very low. These are low migration countries, and they want to keep it that way. So that's a kind of a picture of this situation in Europe. Okay? Now, so who are these migrants? Where do they come from? So that's, I think, also important to parse out. So 44% of them come from other European Union countries. And European Union countries have the rights. Everybody in a European country who is a resident there can move from any European country to any other European country. So no restrictions, and so you get a lot of people coming in from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe because jobs are plentiful in the Netherlands and you can get good wages, right? So that's why we've had particularly large, historically, the last 20 years, 30 years, lots of people from Poland coming in to the Netherlands. So when you think about that first number, you can think Poland as kind of the emblematic country. Almost a quarter of them are Dutch people who come back. Right? So that also counts as migration. So messes up kind of statistics, right? So, but it's important to note that. Right? 10% are non-EU, so they come from outside the European Union, joining family members. So you have somebody who's working, for example, there, or they've achieved asylum status, and they're able to stay in the Netherlands, and they ask for their family to come over, and then these families come over. So 10% of them are people who join people who already come from outside the EU. 10%, and this is a very volatile group, 10% are those who seek asylum in the Netherlands. Right? So that's an issue that draws a lot of attention. So how many asylum seekers should the country allow in? So, but 10% of all migration is from there. 7% of them are students coming from outside the European Union. Many of them stay, but actually most of them in the long run do not. They go home, but they're part of the statistics. And then 6% are labor migrants from outside the European Union, like me. Okay, so I'm also part of that statistics, all right? So it's, so this is kind of like, this is the kind of picture where we get about migrants, okay? So why is it an important issue? There are a couple of reasons just to make this explainable. So why do the Dutch care about migration so much? Okay, so part of it is the sense that they are associated with all kinds of social effects that we don't want to see in our community. Crime, for example. So if you break this up by ethnicity, for example, the chances of at least one conviction for people of 18 to 20 years of age, men, according to their ethnic background. And you see the Dutch are here. So, and if you control for other kinds of factors, then the differences become less great. For example, is there poverty in the background, and you use that then to measure. But you can sort of see that a number of other ethnic groups, Turks, particularly Moroccans, have a higher degree of confrontations with the justice system compared to the Dutch. Right? Even the Belgians seem to be a little more criminally oriented than the Dutch. Right? So, right. Okay, but the Chinese, right? Very, very low statistics over there. So a lot of people associate this. There are high-profile crimes by people coming in from outside the EU, asylum seekers, and this gets a lot of attention in the press. Just 2 days ago, there was a demonstration in our town, in Amersfoort, against the placing of an asylum seeker center. And we had a lot of residents who were really very fearful of what's going to happen to their children if we place asylum centers right in the middle of town. And there was a young girl was murdered 2 months ago when she was on her bicycle, 17-year-old, and then murdered by an asylum seeker. So, isn't this a big problem? Statistically, it's not clear that they are a source of criminality as a whole, asylum seekers as a group, but it's an issue with a lot of traction, a lot of emotion, and people are very concerned about it. And they see this also as, yes, as a threat. So there's that. There's a concern about crime and other kinds of social effects. Then you can also say there's the issue about Dutch identity. This is the Dutch king, right? And he's wearing wooden shoes that you might find in Orange City or made in Orange City, but it's But you've got this idea of Dutchness is being threatened by people coming from the outside. Who are we? What is our identity as a people? So people are concerned about that. And then it's also fed by probably you could argue at this moment the Netherlands' most successful politician, Geert Wilders, who is a member of the Freedom Party, and this is somebody who is an anti-Islam party. It's somebody who also thinks we need to close down all asylum centers, and we need to let the Netherlands be there for the Dutch. So we need to, he's even also from time to time in the past said we maybe need to leave the European Union. There's no support for that in the Netherlands. At right now, the number of people who want a Nexit, as it's called, is 9%. So it's very low, but still other issues have a lot more traction. And you can sort of say there's a kind of a nativist sentiment, right? This country should be for us. We should use the resources, the scarce resources that we have for our own people, and that is a message that generates a lot of support in the Netherlands. So, but there's an issue that I think we can go into a little more deeply to sort of figure out why there's so much skepticism and concern or even hostility toward people coming from outside the country and living in the Netherlands. And that is housing availability. Now in the United States, I know there's no housing problem at all. But well, I'll put it another way. The Dutch have a housing problem as well. And you can see this. These are the average house prices starting in 1993 up until about 2023. You can sort of see the prices are going up to about, right now, something like 400,000 euros, which is about average house or average housing unit now is about $500,000. Okay, so that's a lot of money. Okay, so interest rates are lower in the Netherlands than they are in the United States, but still, this is a lot of money. So there's just not enough housing to go around. And so young people in their 20s and 30s can't find housing. Right? So affordable housing. They have to stay in rental units, or they have to stay with their parents, or they have to resort to other desperate measures to find a place to live. And so you can say the idea that the Netherlands is a crowded country and we just really can't have any more people is fed by this. It's more, I think it's even more propelled by another particular sector that is really uniquely Dutch. There is no arrangement in any European country that is quite like what they have in the Netherlands. And that's what's called social housing. Now, in the United States, you can think about social housing as being, there may be a few units built for low-income families. We can imagine that. I don't know if Orange City has them or not, but they're relatively few and far between. Almost 30% of the total housing stock in the Netherlands is social housing. So it's a lot, and they're run by nonprofit corporations whose primary mission is to offer affordable housing for a large group of Dutch people. So you get often very nice housing, not always, but often very nice housing for relatively cheap rates. Depends on the city, but you might pay, for example, something like anywhere, let's say $1,000 a month. Right, for a nice apartment with a few bedrooms. So it's very much attractive form of housing. There's not nearly enough of it. There are all kinds of reasons why there's not nearly enough of it. And part of the thing too is that once you're in a social housing unit, it's very hard to force you to leave. So even if you're making €1 million a year, you can stay in your social housing unit, right? So makes it very hard for there to be a kind of a flow through. But it's an issue, right? So this is a example of a social housing project, you can say. So this This is not exactly the slums, right? This is really fairly nice living. But there are all kinds of reasons why affordable housing is really hard to build in the Netherlands. The government, 20 years ago, when it made long-term planning, drastically and dramatically underestimated the amount of units that would be asked for. So that's, for the planning, we're still suffering from that. There was a special tax on social housing corporations. Social housing corporations had millions, actually almost €1 billion to spend on new housing projects or whatever form of renovations they thought were necessary, and the government thought it would be a good idea to tax that. Okay? Well, it meant that there would be less for these housing corporations to actually have to build new units. Okay? Affordability requirements, so that is, this is also true for new housing as a whole, not just the social housing. The Dutch government wants houses to be affordable. So they don't want construction companies to build expensive houses. The problem is that construction companies are less interested in building affordable houses than expensive houses. So that's a kind of a disincentive to build. There's sustainability requirements, all right? This needs to be all done in a way that's good for the environment, understandable, but creates its own set of problems. Land use restrictions, you can't just build anywhere in the Netherlands, right? So it's very restrictive. There's also, the European Union has put in new controls on nitrogen pollution. It's not an issue, I think, in the United States or in Iowa, but nitrogen is in the air, and as you have huge amounts of nitrogen building up, then that means that this is also bad for various expressions, various forms of life in the environment. So that's something that is also a restriction, because construction is nitrogen pollution. It's also very hard to get people on the electric grid. Because the Netherlands does not have enough capacity to build further from it on its electric grid. Also, underinvestment in the past being a problem. And the other thing is, you can say 50% of social housing is prioritized for the needy. Okay, so that is so you've got this housing stock and there's stuff available, and you put yourself on a waiting list for social housing. I think in our city, our son, if he wants to go in social housing, has to wait 9 years to get into an apartment. And then one of the reasons why it takes 9 years for, let's say, regular residents to have that is that all kinds of people get prioritized above that. So they say, okay, we need to give emergency priority to particular groups of people. And that's why we need to see to it that you get housing before others do. Okay? Now, the status holders, these are the people who have received asylum in the Netherlands, account for about 5 to 10% of social housing occupancy in the Netherlands. Right? So 5 to 10% of that very much coveted social housing goes to status holders. Okay? So that means people who have come with an asylum request, and that asylum request has been honored, and so they may live in the Netherlands. So these are people who are former asylum seekers who have then entered into the Dutch market, the Dutch labor market, but also the Dutch housing market. But they come in from elsewhere. They're sitting in an asylum center, so they are prioritized. They need to find housing, so they get put at the top of the list. There are other kinds of people there too. This is 5 to 10%, and remember, half is related to this prioritized group. But you can also think about people with special needs. You can think about people who have been, women who have also been evicted from their homes or have abusive spouses. They need to be put at the top of the list. There are a whole series of criteria that there are for giving priority for housing. So it's not just the asylum seekers or the status holders that they become, that they are the real reason for the problem, because it's really those other reasons that are far more important But they are, because they come from outside, because they are not Dutch, because they haven't been part of the system, they haven't, as it were, paid their way in the view of people, they then are the source of opposition among a significant section of the Dutch population. And you can sort of say it's really this feature, right, the asylum seekers coming in and taking our housing, that was one of the main reasons for the riots of a couple of weeks ago. So this is really, so people saying, well, you know, my children, I can't get into housing anywhere. It's all because they are taking away our housing. So that's a kind of an issue that is playing there. So asylum seekers, migration more generally, these are important issues in the upcoming Dutch elections. There are other things too that we could talk about. There's a kind of dissatisfaction with the level of public services. I talked about the Dutch have a relatively affordable care system, but there are people who complain about that too. There are not enough nurses, there are not enough medical personnel working in the system, and that problem is getting worse. So people are saying there are too many shortages, we're not getting the kind of attention that we need, so the quality of care is an issue. Hospitals are closing in certain outlying regions in the Netherlands, and people have to travel further to get medical care, so people are worried about that kind of thing. They're generally worried about the state of government delivering on public services as a whole and the mistakes that they make. And these are people protesting these are people who protested the way the government dealt with essentially offering child care rebates to large sections of the population. A huge scandal, the largest scandal in the last 10 years in the Netherlands, is that a number of years ago, the Dutch government introduced a new measure because people were offended by Bulgarians scamming the system. Bulgarians coming from the other part of the European Union, coming to the Netherlands and essentially using child care rebates to game the system. So they put in a very punitive system to make sure that people who abuse the system would be punished. And so what you saw then, this allowed for a measure in the Netherlands for people who had gamed the system or thought of gaming the system to be essentially punished by clawing back all the money after the fact that they had received from the government. So that meant that you can sort of say that in some cases, people had gotten tens of thousands of euros from the government from their rebate, and they were found to have made an administrative error in their forms, and so they had to pay back tens of thousands of euros after the fact. Okay? And this turned out to affect all kinds of people who were innocent or apparently innocent and whose lives were essentially ruined by this policy. And so the government still doesn't know exactly how to deal with this issue and how to pay this back in a fair way. But it's seen as a kind of an example of government incompetence when it comes to issues of taking care of ordinary people. Okay. So there's a general dissatisfaction with politics. Right? So right now you see this is the current Prime Minister of the Netherlands on the left-hand side by the name of Dick Schoof. He is now head of a caretaker government because there was a collapse of the Dutch government. They lost their majority, and right now his government enjoys a public support of 6%, yeah, which is not high by Dutch standards, right? So it's this is really, right? Okay. Congress has gotten kind of those percentages in the recent past in the United States too, but 6% is really low. Okay, so but you've got this kind of idea that politicians can't solve our problems. They're arguing with each other. They can't sort themselves out. They can't get us out of the mess. And one of the things you can say, one of the problems is, you could argue, is the proportional representation system. In the Netherlands, you have right now a system where if you get 1% of the vote, you get 1% of the seats. You get 5% of the votes, you get 5% of the seats. It's very democratic, it's very representative of everybody's voice, and that's the idea. And it doesn't have to lead to many parties. As recently as 30 years ago, there were the largest three parties had something like 90% of the total vote. Right? So it doesn't have to lead to this kind of situation, but we are now seeing here is various parties. You see 15 different parties represented in the Dutch Parliament. So it makes it very, very hard for coalitions, majorities to be made under these circumstances. Okay, so that's part of the problem. Okay. But again, it's not just the number of parties, it's also about how these parties behave toward other parties. Is there a spirit of cooperation? Is there a spirit of willingness to work with each other? And a lot of people think that is now lacking. Okay. So there's a kind of feeling that there is a decline in the Dutch commitment to consensus and compromise. This is the Dutch landscape, and it's often been said that the Dutch success comes out of what people have called the polder model. That is to say, the Dutch landscape is made out of polder, and that means low-lying land that's often below sea level that is then protected by dikes and maintained by a system of windmills initially, and then other electrically or diesel-generated power stations that pump the water back out, up, and into the sea. And the only way you can do this is through extensive and long-term cooperation. There's no other way that a landscape like this can be built unless you do this together. Now, that's essentially the Dutch story. Now, as an historian, I know that sometimes even in the Netherlands, consensus about how to build canals can take a long time. I'm doing a study of one in the province of Gelderland, and it took them 70 years to figure out what to do, where to lay the canal and how. Okay, so consensus and compromise sometimes takes also a very long time in the Netherlands. But an important theme, and the feeling now is that we're losing that. I talk to people in The Hague, and people are really convinced that this is a lost art, that we are now finding across the political spectrum all kinds of voices by politicians, but also by citizens saying, it's my way or no way. Okay? I'm not interested in listening to what you have to say because the way I see it is the only way you can see it. So there's a kind of a rise of people saying, I'm not interested in dialogue. I'm not interested in compromise. Compromise is a dirty word. Okay, so this is something we also see taking place in the Netherlands. So a kind of decline in the quality of the political culture, you can say. I mean, you can still say polarization rates. When you measure polarization, you know, we, they, when you measure these kinds of things, they're not as high in the Netherlands as they apparently are in the United States. But we're still talking about measures of a kind of, this is my position and I'm staying pat. And it makes it very, very hard for people to solve problems under those conditions. And then generally, the Dutch are unhappy with the state of society. They see it, partly for this reason, as going into decline. People are insistent on doing things their way, they're rude to others, they don't care about what others feel or think. This is a concern that the Dutch have. Now, one of the things that's really remarkable about the Dutch, and I don't know what the exact answer about this is that Dutch concerns about people behaving poorly, and a very large percentage of Dutch thinking this is like the #1 problem. This is unique in Europe. No other European population is worried about the quality of Dutch society in respect to respect and rudeness. Now, in other countries, the Dutch have a reputation for being rude, so you think like, well, they wouldn't have a problem with it themselves. And of course, we could also say the people who are most upset about rudeness are the people who are themselves the most rude. It's possible too, right? I mean, that's, why isn't that guy moving out of my way, right? So it's not necessarily that the people who are offended are necessarily the most virtuous citizens. But there is still this idea in the Netherlands that society as a whole is going in the wrong direction. We don't have enough respect for each other in the way we used to. About a third of Dutch people feel that this is a big problem. So we see that back. And so there are people on the street or, who, on a Friday night who behave badly and have to be managed by the police. Okay, so one of the things we can ask, maybe out of the basis of this, will the Netherlands then, over the long run, remain a high trust country? This is a fascinating map. I'm giving you a smaller inset and a larger inset to focus on it. The green areas is where you have a relatively high percentage of people saying, I trust other people. And so I trust other people. Other people are basically good. I can trust them. And that's where you see the green areas. And the places that are in orange or red, those are places there where public trust is low, where people say, I do not trust other people. Okay? So Croatia, there's not a lot of trust among people, apparently, according to this 2021 study, right? So Eastern Europe generally and Southern Europe generally performs relatively poorly in this respect. But look at, Germany's doing well, but look at the dark green over here in the Netherlands, right? So it's really a very high trust society. I think, the Dutch people think, basically my neighbor is a good person. But we do notice statistically that it does matter where you are on the educational level. You tend to become more trusting of other people in the Netherlands according to the amount of education that you've had. The more years of education you have, the more your trust increases in other people. So these are much lower statistics on average by people with fewer degrees, right? So that's something that's also noticeable. So there's a kind of a divide here also in the Netherlands. So what's going to happen to the green in the future? That's the question that you might ask. Generally, we think high trust societies are good societies. Right? So that's because it means all kinds of things. It means, for example, also your willingness to give to charities depends on your trust in other people. If you give that money to the Cancer Society or to the Salvation Army, is it going to be spent well or not? Can you trust those people? So high trust does matter in all kinds of ways. And they, of course, are increasingly concerned about national security. And we can sort of see this emblematically. This is the Crown Princess, Amalia, and she's there with her class, she has joined what's called Defensity, and that is a special program where you get rigorous boot camp training. And so she will essentially also undergo that boot camp training. It's something she chose herself. It's the first Crown Princess in the Netherlands that has done military training. It's not the first princess in Europe that has done so in recent years, but she is joining them, and lots of young people have joined her in doing that. She's been an example to them. But it's the kind of idea that the Dutch need to get serious about defense. They need to start defending their country. So there's more interest in the military, and there's also a wide recognition that the Dutch haven't spent enough on it. So there are two people that have convinced the Dutch that they need to spend more money, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, right? So, so you see this, actually it's been an American message for 20 years. George W. Bush started with that message, but it's really come in loud and clear more recently. You can sort of see how much countries are spending as a percentage of their GDP on national defense. I think it's about 3.8% in the United States right now. So you can sort of see that would put it between Estonia and Poland. So it's up there on the higher end. You can also say the United States is a world power, and these other ones are not. But still, you can sort of say there is the targeted projection of 3.5%, which is what some countries agree to, and the 5% to which NATO has now committed itself as a whole is not nearly reached. In the Netherlands, it's going to reach 2% this year of GDP, with a commitment to make it go to 5% in the next 10 years or so. So we're really talking about a substantial reinvestment in Europe, Europe's defense across the board. Yeah. So yeah, the Dutch are worried. They see drones coming in and affecting and disrupting air service in Denmark or in Norway, as happened last week. So they're worried about what the Russians are going to do. They are worried about that future. 10 years ago, the Dutch would say, you know, what do we need to spend money on defense for? What are the problems? Where are the threats? Well, now they think they know. Okay, so that is a big change from 10 years ago. Okay. But it's also led to the highest trust in the European Union ever, according to a Eurobarometer survey of May of 2025. Right? So all kinds of Europeans, but also the Dutch say, yeah, Europe is really important, right? Because if we need to hang together, because if we don't hang together, we have no friends anywhere. And so we need to band together as a European Union. So that's one of the things that's increased in the last year in particular. Okay? And with Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU, being very happy with this set of results. So she was also noticing that this was the highest percentage ever since the 1980s, since the Eurobarometer came out. So they are happy in Brussels with this new solidarity with Europe. So what does it all tell us? And I'm just going to end shortly. You know, the Dutch have a great country. I mean, it's a great place to live. I've lived there with pleasure for the last couple of decades. It's a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to be helped if you need help in general. So it's not a country that faces a lot of severe hardship. That's not the Dutch case. The Dutch are doing very well, but Dutch feel that a good future is slipping away, that the way that we have things now is not sustainable. It is disappearing before our eyes. There are threats from outside, threats from within, that is essentially eroding our good future. Certainly the world seems less secure now than at any time since the end of the Second World War. I talked to highly placed Dutch officials who say the world that we created in 1945, led by the Americans, that world is over. It's gone. And so we are in it alone, and we are facing pressures from all parts of the globe, and we are more insecure than ever. That is the feeling there. Domestically, they want complex issues addressed. Dutch think in nuanced ways about migration. They say, yeah, there are asylum seekers who really need to come here or they won't be safe. Or we need to have labor come into the Netherlands and take some of our jobs because we don't have enough people ourselves to provide them. So we need to also be concerned about nitrogen pollution because this is a threat to our environment. So the Dutch recognize these as problems, but they just don't think that government is in a position to solve it. Okay? So they're very pessimistic about that. Okay? And you could say the elections of October 29, later this month then, is unlikely to clearly resolve it. This is the Party of Freedom of Geert Wilders. This is a polling. He's now at 37 seats in Parliament, and he's slated to get 31 according to this recent poll out of 150 seats. But you can also see then there are a couple other parties, the Christian Democrats, the Green Left, Labour Party, a number of reasonably sized parties, the Liberal Party. But how are you going to make a coalition out of that? How are you going to get a majority out of that? Especially since nobody wants to work with this party. And one of the reasons why that is because he has now been part of two parties and he blew them both up by leaving or ending his support for these governments after about a year. So nobody, for reasons of political reliability alone, wants to rule with him. So how are you going to put these set of parties together with all these things? So the question is really open, but you can be skeptical about what the outcomes might be. Okay? Now, a question I was also raised is to what extent can Christians play a role in this? There are three Christian parties: the Christian Democratic Appeal, the Christian Union, and the State Reformed Party. These are not parties that have identical views. On some issues, they differ significantly. But they are all Christian parties, you can say, that are in the middle. They all, in their own way, have a reputation for being bridge builders, for saying, we want to solve the country's problems, we're willing to work with a series of different parties to make this happen. And we want to be constructive parties for the country's future. And it could be that this guy, Henri Bontenbal, head of the Christian Democratic Appeal, may be the country's next prime minister. It's possible. So the Christian Democrats seem to be out in the last elections, but they are now coming back very strongly in the polls, and maybe he will become it. Okay? Churches and Christians as a whole in Dutch society are a moderating, bridging force. This is the Evangelical Broadcasting Association's Youth Day that you see there on the right, celebrated this year in 2025, bringing thousands of young Dutch Christians together. But churches as a whole as being a kind of a moderating force in Dutch society, seeking to reason together to solve a number of issues and problems. So they are smaller than they used to be. They are, in some cases, dramatically smaller than they used to be. Starting with a long decline that begins in the 1960s, but what kind of force might they be? It's very clear to me, at any rate, that you can sort of say the Dutch have a lot of existing strengths, a lot of social capital. I helped write a report by a Dutch government, semi-governmental organization that says it's really important to work together, especially locally, at concrete problems in which you involve the community, not just the state and not just business, but you involve the community more extensively in solving problems. And maybe then we can talk about keeping the Netherlands one of the best places to live in the world. Thank you for listening. I was instructed to entertain your questions.
So, what ranking in regard to the EU in nationalism, conservative separation from, where do they rank?
You mean in terms of how nationalistic are the Dutch? Generally speaking, the Dutch even now rank low on nationalism. So that is to say that the Dutch tend to be less flag-waving patriots than other countries. They historically have also shown the lowest willingness to die for the fatherland statistics in Europe. Is that a measure of patriotism? I don't know, but I mean, it's one measure. Are you willing to die for your country? The Dutch don't score very high on that. It's hard to measure, but they're so the Dutch are not, in that sense, like countries that have refound their freedom where national pride is very important. Think about Poland, for example, as an example of from the Eastern European states where nationalism tends to be very high. So the Dutch don't have that. But we can say, having said that, two things. The Dutch, this is on the rise. So we see more flags than we used to. It is this sense of nation has, an explicit appeal to nation has become important. And the other thing you think it's always keep in mind is that I think there's been a pattern for a long time. The Dutch have been sort of anti-nationalist nationalists. What does that mean? All I mean is that the Dutch don't like waving their flag, but they still think their country is way better than anybody else's. And so is that patriotism? Is that nationalism? You know, I think a lot of Belgians say it is. So they're very irked by Dutch sense of superiority over Belgium. So yeah, but it's a good question. But it's difficult to measure. But I say so rising, but still lower than average.
Back in the 60s, the Christian Union Party was at about 8%. Today, that's a little over 2%. That's quite a slide. And I just wonder what the reason for that is. That because the culture is changing, the moral ethics in the country, drug use, and the permissiveness in the Netherlands?
Yeah, so one of the things, well, actually, it's even more, dramatic. You can say that, you can say in the elections of 1963, which, so that's the year of my birth, but that's also kind of a high point for the Catholic People's Party and the Anti-Revolutionary Party and the Christian Historical Union. These are 2 Protestant, 1 Catholic party. These are the 3 big Christian parties. Together, they had almost 50%, 50% of the total vote. The parties that went into the Christian Democratic appeal now in Parliament have 5. So they've gone from something like 72 or 73 seats out of 100 to 5, right? So that's a dramatic decline. And now with Bontenbal, they may go up to 25, right? So then that's all of a sudden seems like a big party. So yeah, you can say a lot of this has to do with the de-churching in the Netherlands. It has to do with people who sort of say there are other kinds of priorities that we want to give to our lives than being attendant churchgoer or being active in a belief system. We're going to just do that by ourselves. We're going to choose our own individual way. We can also say another point, just to sort of consolidate my point about this, is that the Social Democrats, and let's just sort of say the Dutch left, has also been in a position of very serious decline at the same time. So you can sort of say the parties that historically appealed to collectivities, right? So that is parties that, you know, we do things together. It's important for us to, we're not just individuals, but we're a community, we're a church, we're a class of people, like the laboring classes or whatever you want to put it. People who believe in those kinds of collectivities, that appeals to people less. People are now, in their own mind at least, rugged individualists who decide, I'm going to decide how I want to live my life, and I don't want to be burdened by a responsibility to a collectivity. And that certainly has played a very, very damaging role for the Christian Democrats. Yes?
If you won't plug your own book, I will.
Thank you.
A Concise History of the Netherlands. It's an excellent book. Everybody should read it. I'm always amazed at how little people in this town know about the Netherlands. They know a lot about the pioneers, but they know Scotch about the Netherlands. It's a good book.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I agree with you. Everyone should read it. But it was a great pleasure to write, and it is a point. It's a painful point, not just about Dutch Americans, but Dutch people don't know very much about their own history, don't care very much about their own history, and in particular, Dutch historians don't care very much about Dutch history. Okay? So the fact that I'm an American teaching Dutch history, in some ways, it's an honor to me, but it's also no coincidence. That is to say, fewer Dutch historians are actually interested in Dutch history. They need to say, well, we're a small country. It doesn't really matter. We're not important. What's important is the international thing.
Can you answer a question on the book?
Yes, certainly.
Explain the cods and the hooks. I don't understand this.
Okay. Oh, the cause. Okay. Well, this is not explainable. But I'll try very.
I look at it as the Republicans and the Democrats with Tommy guns.
Yeah, but the difference would be is that so essentially the cods and hooks were mostly in the county of Holland, and they were sometimes elsewhere. Mostly in the county of Holland were two rival factions for power. And they were essentially familial groups that had vested interests. So essentially they were kind of an association of clans that were competing with each other for power. The difference with the Republicans and the Democrats is that there really isn't like a particular values or ideology behind them. It's not like the hooks really believed in this and the cods really believed in that. We're really talking about, and the families that would be part of the hooks and be part of the cods would sometimes shift over time. So you're really just talking about sort of warring associations of families that fought for power and tried to see to it that the Count of Holland was on their side. So that's what I think I can say about that. I see 3 questions here, so I'll take it here, there, and then back there.
Any percentage guess how many Dutchmen claim to be Christian?
So I would say about this, so it depends how you ask the question. For example, do you want to ask about church affiliation? And you might understand that church affiliation is not the same thing as being a Christian. But you would say that, so maybe we're talking about 25 or 30% of the population. Some people would put it lower, maybe at 15%, but it would be, some people would put it higher, maybe up to about 45%. It would, so those are the percentages, so it's hard to come by, but that is. One of the things we can say is that for the first time in many decades, there is an uptick in people's identification with Christian faith, and in particular among younger people. So you can also say that the crisis here that we've been talking about is also maybe, also a reason why younger people have at least a modest greater interest in Christianity than before. Thank you. Yes, Todd.
So this is probably a loaded question, but so what would you say are the general feelings in the Netherlands of the United States right now?
Do you want a consensus?
So first of all, Dutch opinion about this also differs. It's not like, I just want to say it ahead of time, of course you know that, because it's not like every Dutch person has exactly the same opinion about the United States. And so there's a range in view. I'll start off with a kind of a statistic that is actually broadly representative also in the Netherlands. A year ago, the Europeans were asked, do you regard the United States as at least somewhat reliable ally? And about 3/4 of the European population said yes then. That number is now about 1/4. Okay, so we're talking about, in that sense, a very sizable shift. You can sort of say, you can say, well, they're wrong. The United States really is truly a reliable ally, but perceptions matter in this particular case. So I think there's a substantial, I'll say something positive in a minute, but I think there's a substantial lack of trust and in confidence in American leadership in the world, right? So the trust is evident nowhere in the polling that we've seen. So in that sense, you can sort of say the reputation of the United States is in radical decline. Right? You can say, tariffs didn't help, but that's not the real issue. I think it's really more about, is the United States on our side or not? And then the question is just, they don't know. I do, having said that, I don't know any European, I have not talked to any Dutch person, that's not very scientific because I don't talk to every Dutch person, but I know of no Dutch person who thought that the defense arrangements as they were 10 years ago was a good one. Everyone says, of course we need to pay our own way. Of course, the Americans are right if they say you've got to pay up, you've got to invest in your own defense because it's your defense. I know of nobody who says, well, no, just let the Americans keep on paying for this and we're going to lean back and have a good life. So everybody recognizes now, at least, that it is good that that Europeans are paying or are attempting to pay their own way. So that's what I. But still, there's this trust issue. I think is really. But that's I think generally speaking. In general speaking, and just one last thing is I think there are two general concerns that Dutch people, they pay a lot of attention in the United States. One is what they see is, and again, this is their perceptions, two things. One is what they see is an increasingly polarized and violent climate in the United States. So I think they're worried about that. So they see, Americans sort of, descending into a kind of polarization that will lead to no place good. And they would see the Charlie Kirk murder as an example of that. And I think the other one is their concern or their fear of the United States descending into authoritarian government. I mean, that's a widespread perception in the Netherlands, right? So that is at stake.
I wonder if you might say a little more about the special election on October 29, because it's true out here in the middle of the country, even with the Dutch roots, we don't often hear very much about Dutch politics unless we go looking for it, unless something really dramatic happens. And I think it's pretty clear that Wilders' election a year or so ago was kind of an earth-shattering moment, and we maybe were faced with something very odd that by reputation, perhaps the most tolerant society in Europe elected someone like Viktor Orban, one of the least tolerant societies. And so from like over here, it's as if, I remember when Theo van Gogh was assassinated maybe 20 so years ago, this really provocative filmmaker,
right,
who is a really good example of the sort of the testing the limits of tolerance with what he did with the Quran and so forth. And so he's killed by this immigrant, and this is a major sort of incident that the Dutch population has to look at and kind of examine itself. And now, some time later, they elect a xenophobic far-right, and now he's apparently abandoned his own government. What's happening on October 29th?
Okay, this is, there are many aspects to your remarks. I mean, so one of the things you can say that Geert Wilders, this politician, he was born, his political career was born at the moment in the days after the killing of the provocative filmmaker Theo van Gogh by an Islamic extremist. Right? So Islam, as the great enemy, the great opponent, was the cornerstone of his politics. And so he says, we're going to forbid the Quran, we're going to close down mosques, we are going to end Islamic education. Right, so these are the kinds, we're going to make sure that nobody gets to wear, women, we're going to tax them if they wear headwear. So all these things were part and parcel of this. I think it's interesting to note here is that I don't mention Islam very much in this story because Islam is not the same seminal issue now as it was 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, lots of people were talking about Islam, all right? So Islam is this religion, or some people would say non-religion, or an ideology that is a threatening force to Dutch society. So that is more on the back burner now. It's not gone, but it's more on the back burner, and now it's about migration as a whole and the unsafeness of migration in its breadth. And Wilders has shifted his emphasis to pick up on that. I think what you can say is that in general, the rise of this is called the populist right is that it is a remarkable development in Dutch society. American society, you can sort of say, has always had kind of populist features. You can think about Andrew Jackson 200 years ago, sort of rule of the people, and sort of like get rid of the elites and let the people rule in Washington. So it's an important theme in American politics. You even had a populist party right here. We had a populist party at the end of the 1890s. And so it's an important theme. And Dutch politics has never really been organized that way. It's really been in some ways, a kind of a very self-disciplined kind of political game, right? So moderation, making sure you don't use emotionally electrifying speeches, because if you do that, things are going to get out of hand. That was Dutch politics until about the beginning of this century. And that's changed, and the social media climate, has obviously fed on that since. And now where more strident voices, ones that more directly appeal to people's emotions, has become a greater centerpiece of Dutch politics, and not only by Wilders. So, but yeah, does that answer your question in part? Okay. Oh yes, okay, well, go ahead. I guess I should ask you first, since you haven't asked a question yet.
Well, mine is about the United States and just your observations, since you're not a U.S. historian, but the consensus, lack of consensus and compromise in the Netherlands, where it's going down, is also going down here. What other ways would you compare the two countries?
Well, so I'll just keep it to one point, and that is that, and we've talked about one point only, and that is that sometimes you have a discussion whether you want to have a proportional representation system or whether you want to have a district system. So, or another way of saying is, you want to have a two-party system, or do you want to have a multi-party system? Is that something? Because the United States is an example of a two-party system. I think research has shown, and that would be also my observation, is that two-party systems are themselves, certainly in recent times with the kinds of fuel that's available on social media and elsewhere, two-party systems lend themselves more directly toward forceful forms of polarization. So you have two parties, then it's easier for them to become the two cats of Kilkenny, right? I mean, these are the two choices. You get two tribes, and they are aligned against each other. And so you could argue that historically in the United States, there weren't two parties in the United States, there were four parties in the United States. You had liberal Democrats, and you had conservative Democrats, and you had liberal Republicans, and you had conservative Republicans, right? So you had a kind of a four-party system. But for various reasons in the last 30 years, it's become a two-party system, and that means that you've got a lot more conflict and polarization. That's one reason why, I think is one chief reason why polarization levels are higher in the United States than they are as we measure it in European countries, even the Netherlands. Okay? But the other choice, all right, you can sort of say this multi-party thing, it can lead to cooperation, but it also can lead, as it now does, to fracturing and fragmentation. And so, in some ways, it's, choose your poison, right? I mean, is it, do you want, is it the polarization that is the worst disease, or is it kind of the fragmentation of politics that is worse? So that's I just want to sort of, I can leave that as an open question, right? So, but that is what you might think about when you compare the two systems. I think I need to conclude, so I will.
No, you can stay around and visit afterwards, but again, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Also, we should recognize that your parents did make it.
Yes.